Another massive trove of documents obtained by Wikileaks reveals that the United States knowingly imprisoned scores of innocent men in the Guantanamo Bay prison. Now, the biggest story here is one that we probably already knew. The information used to justify the years-long detainment of many of the prisoners was often ludicrously spotty, based on trivial details or unreliable testimony. But the stories of those detained were brought vividly to light by these files. Some were heartbreaking, like the 89-year-old Afghan villager and ailing farmer who was imprisoned for years, or the 14-year-old boy who had been an innocent kidnap victim. Some were absurd, like the fact that some of these prisoners were taken for wearing a popular model of Casio watches used as timers by al-Qaeda. At this moment, 172 detainees remain in the Cuban prison outside of the protection of U.S. courts or international law. With us to discuss their plight and the latest leaks is Jason Leopold, the editor-at-large at The Public Record, and also the author of this book here, an LA Times bestseller, News Junkie. Jason, it's great to have you on. Very excited to have you back on the program. Now, not a lot of earth-shattering...
Thank you. I also just want to mention that I'm the actually deputy managing editor of TruthOut.org.
Truth Out. Thank you so much. A great site. Not a lot of earth-shattering revelations in the latest files, but certainly a lot of disturbing details. Walk me through some of the more significant bits of info that really stood out to you.
Well, first of all, the documents do confirm what we have known for quite a while, that the vast majority of the detainees at Guantanamo were innocent, were sold to the U.S. for bounty. In fact, last year, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Colin Powell's former chief of staff, said in a sworn affidavit that he would be willing to go to court to testify in the case of one detainee to state that the vast majority of the detainees there were innocent, that the Bush administration knew it, that Dick Cheney knew it, and that they were not released for fear of what the political fallout would be. So when we start to look at some of these documents that have been released now, I think that some of the more explosive details, at least from where I stand, is how heavily the government relied upon other detainees to give up information on other detainees, using detainees as informants. The level of exploitation that detainees were subjected to, and that could mean for a wide range of various interrogation techniques. In the case of the first high-value detainee, Abu Zubaydah, this was the detainee that the Bush administration held out as being one of the planners of 9/11. I find what's very revealing in this file is the fact that there's absolutely no mention that Abu Zubaydah was a planner of 9/11, that he was involved in the planning of the attack. So that's not there. And let's keep in mind that Abu Zubaydah was. This is what the entire torture program was built around. So I think what's really important within this raw material that we have here is to keep in mind that there's also a lack of context. So what I mean by that is that we don't know where how this information was obtained in the case of whether it was obtained through torture, through other forms of interrogation. Certainly in the case of Abu Zubaydah, we know that he was tortured brutally, and that obviously makes the revelation suspect. And I think what will be very interesting is that in the case of Omar Khadr's brother, Omar Khadr is the teenager, Canadian citizen who was held at Guantanamo and recently convicted in flawed military commissions for throwing a grenade that killed a U.S. Service member. But his brother was also at Guantanamo, and that's one file that's supposed to be released, and his brother's named Abdul Khadr. And what people don't realize is that Abdul Khadr worked for the CIA, and this has been revealed. This has been disclosed previously. It's just been under the radar. So it'll be very interesting to see that file, because he was there. He was given an internment number, and if in fact they did keep a file on him, we'll get to see that. So some of the details that you had mentioned, I think, are are incredibly troubling. And let's remember that there was a camp there for juveniles. I think the fact that we know that there are at least 14 juveniles, children that were at Guantanamo, and the fact that that the government held them out to be terrorists, when in fact the information was suspect. Which
is not only shocking, but frankly goes against legal international conventions, such as the Geneva Conventions. But I do want to get back to a point that you've raised. You brought up the fact that the Bush administration did not have any vested interest in releasing this kind of information because of the political fallout. But walk me through why the Obama administration would continue to perpetuate this kind of situation. Is it that these dubious intelligence gathering methods were conducted under the Bush administration and Obama didn't want to open up the U.S. to criticism of that? Or is it something more sinister?
Sure. I think it's incredibly complex, but I will say this, that these documents, these files, what they show is that the Bush administration operated outside of the law, flouted the law, created what Guantanamo has been referred to as a battle lab, where a wide range of experiments took place, and some of those experiments could, involve interrogations. The Obama administration, what they are doing now is simply covering up what the Bush administration did. And I think that, look, if they were to, this is all about politics, really, is what it comes down to. So it would certainly result in some sort of call for an investigation, perhaps. I think that the best thing that the Obama administration felt it could do is just to get people not to talk about it.
So then did WikiLeaks fly in the face of that? Jason, did WikiLeaks then undo this sort of logic? I mean, at the end of the day, this information is coming out, and it's almost the secrecy under which Guantanamo has been operated in, and sort of the refusal by certain administrations to confirm what's been alleged for years, I would say is more of a black mark in the eye of the administration than had they come through with the truth in the beginning. So what is going to be the fallout of this?
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think this will be, the only way that this can continue to be damaging for the Obama administration is for the public and the media to report on it, and for the public to actually demand some answers. I mean, look, in the past 24 hours since these documents were released, we have heard absolutely nothing from Congress, nothing at all. I will remind your viewers that the Senate Armed Services Committee released an explosive report on the treatment of detainees at Guantanamo a couple of years ago. And this report, when you hold it up next to the files on the Guantanamo detainees, you really get a better picture as to perhaps how that information, that intelligence that they provided was in fact, how it was actually given, how they provided that to their interrogators. But Congress has been silent. They've been silent on much of the issues of Guantanamo and torture, and the fact that the Geneva Conventions have been violated. Let's remember that this is the same administration that just recently talked about human rights. There's no question that the detainees, that their rights have been violated, their human rights have been violated, and the fact that this administration continues to preach to other countries about upholding human rights is ludicrous. It's laughable, and we have no credibility.
Well, we certainly pick and choose.
Documents,
the United States, I'm sorry to cut you off, the United States certainly seems to pick and choose when we decide to defend human rights and when we decide to stay silent on them, case in point Syria. But I want to go back to something you said. You said that once people start asking questions about this, once there's media coverage, perhaps then there'll be a potential for change. And I don't want to absolve Congress for not being more active on the issue, but it seems to me that there is a lot of media coverage of WikiLeaks. Have we become sort of desensitized to this kind of information? I frankly just don't see policy changing as a result.
I think that people are desensitized to it, and I think that there's a number of reasons why. I mean, let's compare the coverage. The coverage in the U.S. On these documents, on these files, at least in the past 24 hours, compared to The Guardian, for example, in the UK. It's as if they were reading two different sets of documents. With all due respect to the New York Times, their coverage on these files has been horrendous, awful. Whereas the Guardian has actually, provided quite a bit of information, revealing information. For example, they reported that Abu Zubaydah, the first high-value detainee, was waterboarded until he gave up information about Binyam Mohammed, a UK citizen, stating that he was a dirty bomb plotter, planning a dirty bomb, along with Jose Padilla, another alleged associate of Al-Qaeda. But you don't see much of that info in the coverage here, and it's quite a bit, it's watered down quite a bit. So I think people have a sense of outrage fatigue has been certainly out there for quite a while. People feel outraged. They also feel that, look, if what can I do? Congress isn't doing anything. How do we change this? And it's true. You don't have a president that's doing anything really except stating, continue to look forward. You have a Justice Department that thwarts every effort to hold people accountable, to hold the perpetrators accountable. You have a former president, George W. Bush, who openly states in an autobiography that he signed off on the waterboarding. And then you have certain members of Congress who will simply issue press releases condemning that. But that's it. So people feel that there's nothing left for them to do. And at the same time, the coverage of it in the media, at least with regard to torture in Guantanamo, is, there's really only a handful of people who stay on this for virtually almost make it a beat. This has become, certainly for me, what I've been consumed with as a reporter, and I do know several other reporters who feel the same way. But by and large, it's not something that the public feels that they can truly wrap their arms around, and I think that's because they don't see any anything happening on the legal front.
And very briefly, we're almost out of time, but do you see anything changing, any potential for more action from Congress this time around, or do you think it's just going to be more of the same old, a few press releases and moving on?
It's a great question, and unfortunately the answer I have is that absolutely nothing will change. I don't see Congress doing anything that will amount to any sort of accountability. That's for sure. That's gone out the window. We had promises from the likes of Carl Levin, Senator Carl Levin, chair of the Armed Services Committee, House Judiciary Committee Chairman, the former Chairman John Conyers, stating that there would be hearings, perhaps a Truth Commission. Congress will do nothing, and I think my fear is that this will just sort of disappear, and after a week or two, we'll go back to our what we've been talking about for the most part.
That's certainly disappointing, but you know what? Why don't we have you back on in a week or two and try to keep these folks focused on this issue? Thank you so much.
That's a deal. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
That was Jason Leopold of Truth Out, public record and author of the bestseller book News Junkie. Thank you so much.